In today's video, we will be attempting to answer one important question. Is Trump or DeSantis more electable? Now, as you can see on the map, there are blue states, red states, and purple states. Blue states are where Democrats have a clear advantage. Red states are where Republicans have a clear advantage, in which it doesn't really matter about the candidate quality. But the purple states are the states that are considered more competitive. Now we know states like Iowa or Ohio are very, very likely to go red, as opposed to some states such as Michigan and Pennsylvania being much closer. Nonetheless, we'll be explaining how each candidate will perform in each state, and if Trump or DeSantis is actually the better choice for GOP to have a better chance at winning in 2024. This does not mean I'm supporting either political party. This is just if I'm a GOP strategist, who should I support in 2024? Now let's get right into today's video. Now let's start off by looking at some of the states here. Now we know that there are two major political regions in the United States, the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt. The Rust Belt is in the Mideastern area of the United States. We have the Rust Belt, which is Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Iowa, and a couple in the New England states. One, the Sun Belt, we have states of Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. The Rust Belt, which is these states up here, are generally considered to be trending Republican, while the Sun Belt, which is these states over here, are generally considered overall to be trending blue. Now, there are exceptions. For example, Florida is not trending blue, but generally this is typically the trend. Now let's get started. Let's get starting here. So first of all, let's go to the state of Nevada. Would Trump or DeSantis do better in the state? Now let's go to 2020. Trump did lose the state but only by around 2.4 points, so not the most significant margin. In the Republican primary in the state of Nevada here, let me just try and find it. There are some polls here that show that DeSantis is 7 points behind the former president. However, this poll is quite ancient. It has been several months since the poll was taken, and this was just one poll, so don't factor this in that much. Now, is Trump or DeSantis the better candidate? Well, it really depends on which region you talk about here. I think DeSantis, however, is the better candidate because of the fact that the state's largest population center is Clark County. That accounts for more than 2/3 of the votes, and the remaining half of the remaining 1/3 of the vote is from Washoe County. These are counties that require suburban appeal, and this is where, generally speaking, Ron DeSantis does best in, and he does end up doing better in these Sunbelt states, as opposed to Trump, who does better in the Rust Belt states. Now let's go to the state of Arizona. Now, Arizona is generally considered to be a more moderate state, and if we look at the polling here on 538, generally speaking, DeSantis and Trump have both been Trump has been leading in most of these polls. Nonetheless, these are Republicans in the state are more likely to support Trump. That being said, what Republicans really need to win in a state like this is the more moderate base in voters that would likely support someone like McCain, but not someone like Trump. In which case, this state is a state that is considered better for a candidate like Ron DeSantis. Now let's go to the state of Texas here. Texas, it is again a very diverse state. If we look at 2020, you can see there is a lot of rural areas in what is considered the Great Plains in the United States. Areas such as Hutchinson County, Moore County, Hartley County, this part of the state. Then we have some more urban areas such as Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. These are the Democratic centers. And we have the most important parts of the states such as Williamson, Fort Worth, and Denton and Collin counties. Now these are areas that are fastly trending blue, and typically Republicans need a combination of the three of these things here. So basically the urban, suburban, and rural areas to be able to win. Now Democrats definitely need all three of them. Democrats need the rural areas to be relatively competitive and have lower turnout. The ex-urban areas to vote blue, and the urban areas to have high turnout to even have a remote chance at winning the state. So this state is definitely going to go red, I think, regardless of if DeSantis or Trump is a candidate. Nonetheless, I think DeSantis could do better in this state because, again, suburban areas and urban areas make up the huge population centers, and even some of the counties such as Potter County and Lubbock County, I believe, these are still areas where there are small cities, small exurban areas, and these are areas that Republicans need to win in order to actually win the state. Now for the state of Minnesota here. Now this is a state that is in the Rust Belt, and you can see DeSantis is currently 3 of 3 because these states are all in the Sun Belt region. For the Rust Belt, Trump would have a much stronger appeal. Trump lost the state by 7 in 2020, which sounds like a relatively wide margin. However, he only lost the state by 1.5 points against Hillary Clinton. Not to mention that this state has the longest Democratic voting history, as it has voted blue in a very long. It has a very long Democratic history. In fact, Walter Mondale only carried the state with Washington, D.C., and since then, the state has not voted red, so this is definitely a state that really has a huge Democratic history, and Donald Trump, although he didn't do that well in some of the suburban areas, did very, very well in much of the rural areas, and this is why Trump can do really well in this Rust Belt areas. He can run up the margins in much of the rural areas, and someone like DeSantis simply cannot do that. And for that, Trump is definitely, I would say, the better candidate in a state like Minnesota. Now, Iowa and Ohio, I will combine these talking points here. These are areas where rural areas actually make up a very significant portion of the state. In Ohio, for instance, where Trump really ran out the numbers, were in counties like Lake County, Genuine County, Ashtabula Blue County. These are blue-collar counties. These are working-class counties in particular. These are areas that Obama carried, but areas that Trump was able to carry very easily. You look at some of these counties, for example, Genuine County, this is a county that voted for Trump by 23 points. Obama actually carried the county in 2008. And this is where Trump shows his major strengths. Again, in some of the rural areas, although he wasn't able to run up the margins in the urban areas, that doesn't really matter. He did very well in the part of the state, in the very rural part of the state that borders the state of West Virginia. He did very well in the part that borders the state of Indiana. And ultimately, Trump is definitely better in a state like Ohio. Similarly, in the state of Iowa here, I'm just going to pull it up to you. Again, he was able to run up the margin across the state. And really, in some of the state areas that border Illinois and Wisconsin, these areas definitely very heavily towards Barack Obama back in 2008, but also went very heavily towards Donald Trump in 2020 and 2016, showing his strength in much of the rural areas and the more conservative part of the United States. So that is that. Now Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a state that Trump lost in 2020 from a flip from 2016. So you're like, well, Trump can't appeal here, right? The answer is definitely not. He can do very, very well in some of the rural areas. He was able to demolish Democrats in this district right over here in the Clara County area in Jackson County, and some of these counties that border Madison. And he's been doing very well in some of the rural areas. I know it doesn't look like much of the counties actually are very dark red. That being said, he is extremely strong in the rural areas, and that is where really states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania are decided in, especially states like Wisconsin where rural areas are very important for a Republican's victory chances. Now, Trump did admittedly do quite poor in areas such as Washington County, Washaqa County. These are areas where Trump underperformed potentially other Republicans, but you can see that even compared to his 2016 performance, much of the rural areas actually trended towards the Republican Party, and that is really where you need to win in a state like Wisconsin. Thus, Trump can do better in a state like Wisconsin. Now, in a state like Florida, this is going to be actually really interesting. DeSantis is the governor of Florida, but Trump also has a residential area in the state of Florida. He is currently a registered voter in the state of Florida. And does he do well in Florida, or does Ron DeSantis do well? Well, the answer is both of them does really well. Donald Trump won the state by 2.7 points, a very significant margin. Now I know it's barely over a 3-point victory. Is there anything significant about that? The answer is yes. The state is very, very competitive. And Trump has started the shift that makes the state leaning more towards the Republican Party, and DeSantis did very, very well here. DeSantis won the state by nearly 20 points. He is very appealing in much of the Sun Belt. And that's really a trend here. Trump does better in the Rust Belt, DeSantis does better in the Sun Belt. Even though Trump also technically registers as a Republican in the state of Florida. Let's pull up the polls here. This is one of the rare states that Trump pretty much defeats, DeSantis pretty much defeats Trump consistently. He won by 31, 25, 11, 26, and 45 points respectively. Now I know there's this Emerson College poll that shows Trump up by 2, but that's really not that significant. Because there's all these polls that show Trump, DeSantis having a huge lead. Thus, this shows that DeSantis' appeal in the state is really significant. Not to mention that he outran Trump in the state in a 2-year period by 14 points. Now going to the state of Michigan, I'm just really going in a random order. Now Michigan's a state that Trump also lost and lost about 3% of ground. But that doesn't really mean he doesn't appeal in the state. He's very good in a state like Michigan. He ran up the numbers in the rural areas. Now, where he lost basically was the Detroit area, Oakland County, Macomb County, Kent County. These are areas that Trump ultimately lost support and ended up losing the state in. That being said, prior to Donald Trump, Republicans were losing the state by 10 points in the Obama era, and by a similar margin prior to the 2000s. So Trump actually made this case a lot closer for Republicans, and I think that he may or may not win the state in 2024, but he is a better appealing candidate than Ron DeSantis in a state like Michigan. Now in the state of Pennsylvania, who is better, DeSantis or Trump? Now this is a Rust Belt state, but this state is actually harder to decide on because again, there's a lot of suburban areas that actually decide the elections in the state. For example, Allegheny County, Chester County, Montgomery County, Delaware County. These are counties with at least 300,000 voters each, and these are areas where both parties need to run up the numbers. Democrats need to get around 60% of the vote in many of these regions, while Republicans simply need to lower turnout and get around 45% in order to win. And the rural areas in the state aren't as populated as compared to a state like Wisconsin. So it's not as clear because Ron DeSantis typically does well in the suburban areas, Trump does better in the rural areas. But at the end of the day, because this is a Rust Belt state, and generally Trump has done very well in Rust Belt states, I will give the state to Donald Trump. Now for the final couple of competitive states here. First off, the state of Georgia. Who is going to do better in the state of Georgia? Well, this is pretty obvious actually. Although the state does have a lot of rural areas that went very heavily towards Trump in 2020, this is just not the focus in the state of Georgia, as within a time period of about 8 years, the counties like Gwinnett, Cobb, and Newton, these are counties that went for Mitt Romney, actually went for Joe Biden by 10 points, 14 points, and 18 points respectively. In fact, this is how Trump lost the state. He easily carried it in 2016 by more than 5 points, and Mitt Romney was able to carry the state by more than 7. Mitt Romney actually underran Donald Trump in much of the rural areas, but did extremely well in the suburban areas, and Trump was just not able to capitalize on that, getting a surprising loss in the state, as opposed to pretty much overperforming in everywhere else. So it does seem like that Trump does not have the appeal. Does DeSantis have the appeal though? Now he might not have the appeal that someone like Mitt Romney had back in 2012, but he should certainly do better. Thus, I'm going to give the state to Ron DeSantis. Now, for the state of North Carolina, this is relatively tough because I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence to suggest how either the two of these candidates will compare. Now, Trump did end up winning the state of North Carolina, but he got under 50% of the vote. So, will he actually do that well in the state? Well, it's not that clear. He did very well in much of the rural areas. He did very well in some of the rural black areas, in fact. If you look at the trend here, trending heavily towards the Republican Party, as opposed to his 2016 performance, as well as that in the district over here, trending heavily Republican. However, he lost a lot of ground in areas like Clackamas County, Union County, and Galveston County and Mecklenburg and Guilford County. These are pretty much Democratic senators, and these are areas that some of them actually Republican senators, but Trump definitely lost ground in the state in much of the exurban areas. Now, he did very well in the rural areas, but at the end of the day, in a state like North Carolina, you definitely need to get more competitive in some of the urban areas for a Republican to actually win. Thus, I'm going to give the state to Ron DeSantis because he typically does better in some of the suburban areas. Now, for Maine's 2nd district here, Trump definitely, I think, has the upper edge. He did very, very well in this district. Despite losing the popular vote by 4.5 points, he won Maine's 2nd congressional district, which is this rural region up here, by nearly 10 points, as opposed to Obama in 2008 and John Kerry and Al Gore in 2000 and 2004, respectively. Democrats were typically able to carry the district by around 10 points. In fact, in the Bill Clinton area, more than 15 points. Now, Republicans are consistently winning this district, at least on the presidential level. So, this is definitely an area that goes for Trump. Now, what about Maine at large? Well, it does seem like Trump actually has a higher appeal here because the state has become a lot closer, thanks mostly due to Maine's 2nd congressional district. Now, going to this Nebraska 2nd district, who will do better here? Now, Trump definitely underperformed expectations. Now, if you look at Nebraska's 2nd district here, you might say, well, this is a heavily Republican state. What do you mean? Well, Nebraska's 2nd district, just like Maine, is pretty much, they have a split electoral vote system where the 2nd district is pretty much the Omaha region, and this is a county that won for Joe Biden by around 30,000 votes. And this is an area that Trump definitely underperformed in, and basically, this is the type of area that DeSantis could probably do better. Not saying he's going to win the district, but at least he can do better. And finally, for the state of New Hampshire, this is not that easy, but if we look at the 2020 performance from Donald Trump, it wasn't that great. Trump only won 2 counties out of around 7 or 8 counties in the state, thus showing that his potential weaknesses in appealing to New Hampshire voters. Now, could DeSantis actually win the state? I don't think so, but I think he might be able to do better than Trump in the state. Thus, I'm going to give it to Ron DeSantis. Here you go. Here you go. Some takeaways in this video. Well, first off, you can see a regional appeal here. Trump doing much better in much of the Rust Belt New England states, while DeSantis doing much better winning all the Sun Belt states over former President Donald Trump. And really, if you want a Rust Belt candidate, you want someone like Trump who can appeal very well to much of the working class, much of the rural voters. While if you want someone to win suburban voters, then you need someone like Ron DeSantis. And really, it's not about who can do better overall. If you just look at the electoral vote numbers, it's DeSantis, but rather, what type of candidate do you want to nominate in each region? Democrats have a similar issue here, so basically, different candidates overperform and underperform in different regions. But how do you capitalize on that on both the Democratic side and Republican side to win elections? In this case, we can see that on the Republican side, someone like DeSantis could do better in the southern states, while someone like Trump can do better in the rural states. The Rust Belt states. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Goodbye.